Welcome again to another edition of Consciousness Hour. Indeed, this is Consciousness Hour recording from May 2018. For many, many years, I've been fascinated by a phenomenon I've noticed happen a great deal. And this is the circumstances where somebody is a die-hard atheist or is a die-hard person who does not believe in anything other than the physical reality that we see around us. What we see is real, and everything is, therefore, anything that is not beyond our own perceptions is not there, it's not real. The term usually called is materialist reductionism. And most of us are materialist reductionists because this is what our senses tell us about the nature of reality, except for the great mystery that there's something chundering away behind my eyes and presumably everybody else's eyes, whereby we have an inner life. We have thoughts, dreams, we have everything that takes place inside our brains. But that isn't shared by anybody else. So that indeed is a great mystery. But the more curious thing is when individuals who have spent all their life not believing in these things suddenly have an extraordinary experience. And that extraordinary experience suddenly changes everything. And I remind people about the word empiricism. Empirical comes from the Latin from experience. And effectively, everything that we perceive around us, we are experiencing all the time. So therefore, if I experience an hallucination or I experience an extraordinary state of consciousness, that's still an experience for me. And I learn from that experience. I can't share that experience with other people, but it doesn't mean it's not real. And I'm reminded here of the circumstances with Dr. Eben Alexander, who a few years ago had an extraordinary near-death experience, which completely and utterly changed his whole worldview. Now, today's guest, Jonathan Beecher, is somebody who this has happened to. Now, I met Jonathan around about six or 7 months ago. We are mutual members of an organization called the Scientific and Medical Network. And this is a group of individuals who are scientists and medical people and enthusiastic amateurs and enthusiastic lay people who are interested in extraordinary experiences and trying to gather greater understanding of the true nature of reality. Now, John is one of these individuals, but John, historically, wasn't from this worldview. Jonathan had a very, very totally different worldview, which we'll touch in on the interview. But I've been doing some research on John, and he is an absolutely fascinating guy. And as many of you know, I absolutely love my rock music, and I all through my life, my great interest is music. And I've suddenly discovered that the guy we're interviewing today has such a pedigree in this area. So what I'd like to do is to bring in a little bit about John by having John tell us a little bit about his history, who he is, and his background. And then maybe he can then explain to us what happened to change his worldview, because it's a fascinating story. So John, without further ado, welcome to the Consciousness Hour.
Hi, Tony. Thanks for having me on. Thank you very much. So where do I start? Where would you like me to start?
Probably how you got into the music industry and a little bit about your background there would be really fascinating.
When I was 23, I was working as a salesman for a little record import-export sort of company down in Surrey. And a pal of mine was the sort of sales director there. And then I got promoted and I was made a sort of export manager. So I'm now traveling around the world, selling records to people, buying records. We were buying import, records from Japan, records from America, stuff that wasn't available here, all that kind of thing. And then I left, and then he left, and then he called me up and said, I'm starting this little company. And he was interested in the video business, but I want you to, we were just buying and selling records at the time. And he said, but I want you to, do you want to come in, get involved with me and take care of all the sort of record side? And we were only in our 20s. So I said, yeah, okay, why not? Let's do that. So we started this sort of company where we were just buying and selling records in bulk from all over the world. But then we started licensing records. So we started going to record companies and people were licensing their music and things like that. And that went on and on. And then the CD came in and all of a sudden we sort of thought, well, hang on, this is interesting. So when we all liked music, we were all into music. So we started licensing more and more and more. And then we raised some money. And then I used to go around the major record companies asking if they'd license their catalogue, and they would all say no. And then I keep going back, and then in the end they say yes, because most of the stuff was deleted. And then we went public, And by then we raised a lot of money, and then we went around starting buying record labels. So we bought PRT, which owned the Kinks, as you like the Kinks, and that kind of thing. We bought the Black Sabbath catalogue. We bought the Iron Maiden catalogue in America. We bought the Bronze catalogue, so we owned Motorhead, Black Sabbath, Uriah Heep, all these bands. And then, of course, a lot of these bands started approaching us to be their record company. So then we started, recording, but with well-established bands, really. We didn't really work with new bands because we didn't feel that was our strength. So we did albums with people like, lots of people, everybody from George Clinton to Steve Earle to, I can't think, Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden to lots of different people. And basically made that into quite a decent sized company and ran it for years, and then sold it to an American company and a public company in America. And then I carried on there running it for a couple of years, and then I left and started another company, which is another company called Snapper Music, which still exists to this day. It's in London. It's a small, I say it's small, it's not a bad size, in London. That's still going. So that's what I was doing there. But I was very happy doing that. I mean, I did it for, even, to use an old, in that kind of business, I was very fortunate to be in that business, really, because it was, having been in there from a sort of young age, it was a nice business. You didn't have, no one cared in that business whether you went to university or whether you didn't, whether you were black or white, gay or straight. No one really cared. Everybody just liked music, and to a degree, you were dealing with artists, so you were trying to put square pegs in round holes, trying to make something creative, commercial, if you see what I mean, make it fit. So it was an interesting business, but largely I have fond memories of it all, and I. Even the bad times were good. To use that also. It was good fun. But then what happened was, it was in the year 2000. So I've been doing it then. I've been in the business, different companies for 28 years or something like that. So I had one night, some friends of mine I introduced some friends, some American friends, and they got married, and they had a child, and my wife was the godmother. And so we had a lot of people staying the night for the pre-christening dinner night out. And on this particular night out, we all went out and got very drunk, but no more drunk than any other night, if you see what I mean, any other big celebration. So it wasn't anything extreme. And I had all these people staying the night with me, the godparents from San Francisco and LA there. And I went to bed about 2:00, and then and I went to sleep, and that was that. And the next thing I know, I went to bed. The next thing I know, my wife is telling me that I'm in trouble. She's woke, I can hear her in the background, so as if I'm dreaming. She's going, "John, wake up! You're in trouble. You're in trouble." Anyway, so I open my eyes and I look up. I don't feel in trouble. I don't have any. I have no. I've just. But I look up and I realise she's standing over me. i.e., I'm not in bed, and. So she said, and then what happened was, then one of these American guys, one of the other godparents, came in and he started shouting and said, "We've got to call an ambulance." So I thought, well, I must be in trouble. And then the next guy came in. He was an old hippie kind of guy from San Francisco. He walked in, took one look at me, and he went to the bathroom and vomited. So I thought, I really must be in trouble. So anyway, so then she held this mirror up to me while I'm on the floor, because I wasn't in any kind of pain. I had no pain. And basically what happened was, I had no memory of it, but I'd fallen up. She'd heard a bang, basically. It was about 5 and 6 in the morning or something like that, 5 or 6 in the morning. And I must have fallen on my face. Just, how those are in those Charlie Chaplin movies where people just go down. And I'd knocked all my front teeth out. I'd severed my lip. I'd bitten my lip off, really. It was hanging down. I had 30 stitches in my lip through here. And my jaw was broken on both sides. So I was a mess. But interestingly, in no pain. So I was taken to hospital, and they sort of fixed me up, and I had to have an operation, and they stitched me all up and put my jaw. I had to have 6 weeks without speaking, basically. And that was, so I have no memory of this, by the way. I had no, but it was after really that accident that everything kind of changed, really, because I realised. It took a while, but I realised I felt very different, but I couldn't really explain it. I couldn't. So for instance, I used to go shooting, do a lot of game shooting. I had a shotgun, and we used to go up to those stately homes in Yorkshire and places like that, go shooting and all the rest of it. And this had happened in October. And so there was a shooting season on, it goes through to January. And my pal called me up and said, because we had shooting trips booked, for that year. And he said, are you ready? Are you healed up now? Are you ready to go back shooting? And I said to him, I can't go shooting. He said, why not? I said, well, I couldn't possibly kill an animal. He said, why not? You've been killing him for years. I said, I don't know. I just can't do that. I can't even contemplate doing that. And so that's my. But I didn't associate anything that happened with this. This was anything to do with a bang on the head, if you like. I didn't think it. But slowly over the next year or so, immediately I felt very different. I felt. So, for instance, as you said, I was a complete atheist. I had no interest in anything paranormal or anything like that. I mean, I think I was a reasonable person. I don't want to say spiritual because I don't want to say that. But all of a sudden, I now felt kind of plugged in, as if I had plugged into something. I had a high-pitched whistling in my head, which some might say is tinnitus. I don't know, but it doesn't bother me. I've still got it, and I had these are physiological things. But all of a sudden, I had this kind of odd ideas, that I didn't have before, like, the idea that there is no death. Death is just nothing. It wasn't just not having a fear of death anymore. I never used to think about death too much. But, like I was in my early 40s, and most of us probably, try not to think about that kind of thing. But now all of a sudden, it was a big thing, and it wasn't a big thing in the sense of anything bad. It was this idea that there is no death, only the body dies, obviously, and the idea that this wasn't home, so these are really strange ideas for me, and at the same time I didn't associate them with having this accident. I didn't put two and two together. It took me about a year, I think, to really work out, and I started writing a journal, and I started having all sorts of odd dreams, which then some turned out to be precognitive, which I didn't even know what precognition was. I didn't know. So really, I was having all these things are happening. I used to have a lot of coincidences happen, but now they were increasing. Synchronicities were increasing, and the other thing was that was very frustrating, if you like, for me. It was all the things that I valued before, like I was in a business that I really loved doing. I like making money. I drove fast cars and had nice houses and, kids in private school and all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden I had no interest in any of that. It was just like, it was unimportant, trivial almost, not relevant in any way to who I am or who I was. And that was very disconcerting because I didn't really like that feeling, because I was so I went out and partied a lot because I was trying to get back to this whole, because I couldn't really work out what was going on. And it was only really about 2 years later, I think, a couple of years later, 2002. But I started writing this journal because I couldn't, I was writing everything down, what was happening, how I was feeling, and all this sort of thing. And one evening I was writing about a friend of mine called Brian, who died in my house in 1988. And at the time I was divorced, I had a son, and friends always used to, I bump into friends, and this one here, he stood up with his girlfriend, and he needed someone to stay, and I said, come and stay, and he'd come and stay for a few weeks and end up staying for a year. And on one particular night out, he'd gone out drinking, and the guy who owned a club where he'd gone to brought him back to the house, and drunk at about 2 a.m, knocked on the door and sort of handed him to me, if you like. His name was Brian, and so I put him on the sofa because he wouldn't go upstairs, and went back to bed. And when I got up in the morning, he was laying on the floor, like he was hung over. He'd been sick on the carpet and all this sort of thing. I was annoyed with him because he'd been sick on my new carpet, and so I tried to get him to go to bed, and he wouldn't go to bed. Bear in mind, at this time when I was 32 and he was 33, I think, 34 maybe. And I tried to get him to go to bed, and he wouldn't go to bed. And so in the end, I left him to sleep it off. I went to visit my parents, and when I came home in the afternoon, he was dead. And basically what had happened was he had while he was in that bar drinking, he'd gone to the bathroom, you know, a lot of those bathrooms in the basements, and apparently he'd fallen down, banged the back of his head, fractured his skull. There was no sign of any fracture, but he had a brain hemorrhage, basically. So that was in 1988, and that was a very traumatic, as you can imagine, event. So in 2000, I've had my head trauma, if you like, and 2 years later, I've had all sorts of things going on. I've been writing everything down, not quite understanding why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. And then on this particular night, I started writing about him, and I was writing about that story and about how it was strange that, you know, maybe if I'd have made a different decision and taken him to hospital, I can't say I was feeling guilty, but I was just observing the idea that he died and maybe he'd still be alive. And what happened was, as I was writing, I decided to go into the kitchen and make some toast. And I went in and I plugged the toaster into the plug, and I just had this kitchen rewired because the whole house had been renovated, and the kitchen, the electrics all blew out. So I went to the utility room, fixed it, made some toast, carry on, and then went back, carried on writing. Anyway, 2 or 3 days later, so I'm in 2002, 2 years after I've had a bang on the head, I'm writing about Brian. First time I thought about him, he died in 1988, so it wasn't like I thought about him every day. So I was that. And 2 days later, my sister called me. My sister's a very kind of normal, you know, girl, younger than me, and she said to me that she'd met some friends who she hadn't seen for a while on Friends Reunited. You remember the Friends Reunited website thing? She'd met a guy which went to school and his wife, and they'd been hanging out together. And she said to me that his wife needed to talk to me and I should call her. And this was on a Thursday evening or something, and I said no, I wasn't really that keen on calling someone when I didn't. And I asked her why, and she wouldn't tell me, because she said if she told me, I wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't call her. But she persisted. So in the end, I said okay. So I called this number. I think they were in Oxford, and I spoke to this guy. His name's Johnny, the husband, and he put me on to his wife, who I'd never met before. So I'm now talking to this friend of my sister's, the wife of the friend of my sister's, who I've never met before. And then she tells me that her grandfather had died and she'd been feeling, you know, quite low, and that someone suggested she go and see someone. And I didn't know anything. I said, what, you mean like a psychiatrist? So I knew nothing about anything to do with anything like that. And she said, no. She said, I mean a medium or a clairvoyant. And I said, oh, I didn't know anything about mediums. I certainly didn't believe in them. I wasn't anti any of this stuff, but just wasn't part of my worldview. So she then went on to tell me that she thought her grandfather had come through and all this sort of stuff, and he'd given her some, and she had some evidence and this and that. And then she said halfway through the sitting, she said a communicator came in called Brian, who said he had a message for John. Well, her husband's name's John, but she didn't know anyone called Brian. So the medium gave her the information and told her that this John was connected to her and that she should go home and, you know, give her, probably her husband, and give him the information. So when she got home, she starts telling her husband, Johnny, this thing. And then he said, hang on a minute. No, this has nothing to do with me. He said that the girl, Nikki, my friend who we met recently, that we've been hanging out with, her brother, John, i.e. me, had a friend called Brian who died in this house. So she said, I think it's that Brian. So that's why she wanted to talk to me. So I'm now talking to this, are you with me? I'm now talking to this woman who I've never met before about a guy called Brian who died in my house who she'd never met before. And then she said to me, so I said, okay. So I said, well, what? She said, he has a message for you. I said, okay. So I said, what's the message? She said, you've been thinking about him in the last few days, which is true. I've been writing about him 2 or 3 days before, which is quite remarkable in itself, because I hadn't thought about him for a long time. And she said, he wants you to know, bear in mind she knows nothing about him or me. She said, he wants you to know that although that looked like an accident, that was his time. Everyone has a time. That was his time, which left me with huge philosophical questions to this day. How does that work? You know, did he throw himself? How does that work? You know. And then she said. Then she described him, that he was sort of tall, 6 foot tall, with blonde hair, which is not usual for an English guy. So, you know, what he did for a living, that he sold jewellery and all this kind of stuff. She had all this information that she was telling me that he'd been told. And then at the end of it, she said, the medium said we had a problem with our kitchen electrics, and we were so convinced we'd had this electrician around and there was nothing wrong. And I said, okay, when did you see this medium? Anyway, it was a few days before my kitchen electrics blew up. So that was my first. So that was an interesting experience for me, because I thought to myself, could my sister have played a trick on me, even though she never played tricks on me before or since. But I thought, well, even if she knew a few things about Brian, the one thing she wouldn't know about him is that I'd been thinking about him over the last few days, i.e. writing about him, or the kitchen electrics. She wouldn't have known about any of that, and there was so much other stuff. So I was very intrigued by that, because I couldn't really understand it. And I think it was from that point on. So this is interesting. I'd had a head trauma. I was feeling very different, not really understanding why. And then I get contacted by some drop-in communicator who's also died from a head trauma to give me some information. And I think that was when I really kind of I started reading a lot, and then I visited a medium about a year later and had some amazing evidential experiences. And I had a lot of those. I could fill a book with those kind of experiences. And it was really then, it was about a year later so I was now reading that kind of literature. And I think I read a book by Kenneth Ring, and in it he talks about, I can't remember the book, but in it he talks about people who had near-death experiences or spiritually transformative experiences, and how it affects them afterwards. And he talks about them. They go away from prescription drugs. They have no interest. They lose interest in materialistic things. They feel they're connected to God and God, whatever, not God, but not the Christian God, but whatever we want to call God, and and all these other things. And I was thinking, I could tick all these boxes. I started doing voluntary work. I'd left my job. I had no interest in fast cars anymore. I split up with my wife. I did everything. So that was the start, really, of this chapter. So this kind of, for me, there was definitely, before I had that accident, life, which is the music business and all the rest of it, and then there's a since, and since has been way more interesting, even though the before was very interesting. So that's why we're sitting here today.
Very interesting here, in that unusually, I'm aware of the research of Kenneth Ring. Also, somebody that's who has been on this show in the past is Dr. Penny Satori, who has recently written a book on transformative NDE experiences. So here we have something that ordinarily somebody will have a near-death experience and they will experience the experience, whereas you seem to have had a kind of a subliminal one that has engendered all the general things that near-death experiences described by Kenneth Ring and Melissa Valorano and other researchers, but you're not necessarily aware of it. Now, I was interested, there were 2 or 3 things you said in your talk just then, and the one thing was, you said you had a series of precognitions. Do you recall any of the precognitions you had, or could you describe any of them or remember any of them?
Yeah, yes. Funny, actually, just going back, when that conference where we didn't meet, but that's where we became aware of each other, the one before last year. Yeah. There was a lady there called Diana. She was a colonel in the US Army. Was it Corcoran or Corcoran?
Oh, Diane Corcoran, yes, of IANDS, yeah.
And she works with people who had near-death experiences. And what she said was very interesting for me, because she said that something like a huge percentage, about 40%, she was talking about the amount of people, if you remember, who have near-death experiences, which is a bit of a catch-all term now, isn't it? People aren't necessarily near-death, but they have a transformative experience. Yeah. And they're confused, that some people think it's PTSD or whatever. And then she said, which was interesting for me, she said, of course, then there's quite a few people who have them, and they have no memory of the experience, but they just have all the after effects, which is what I had. And so they're walking down the road and giving their money away, all this kind of thing. And she said, we normally find that those people the people who have had those experiences suffer a head trauma. And I thought that was interesting, because I'd never heard that before. So, I've had quite a few precognitive experiences. I had, but some of them have been really. There was one, for instance, where I had a meeting with a guy at a record company, and I was that morning, and I woke up, and at the time I was writing down in this dream. I'm writing down. I'll go back a little bit. What happened after this is I'd been writing a journal, but B, I decided I was now becoming very immersed in all this idea, and I wanted to do something. So I decided I wanted to do something to do with it. I'd become very interested. I wouldn't say obsessed, friends of mine might think I've become obsessed, but it's just I was just feeling very different about the whole world, and still do. And so I read that book by Lynn McTaggart, The Field. Remember that book? And,
Yes.
and she was doing some lectures. And so I went to those field lectures. And one of the speakers there was Gary Schwartz from the University of Arizona. And I'd read his afterlife experiments book, because I'm now reading everything I can get my hand on. This time. And at the end of he was signing books at the end of the conference. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, how long are you here for? And he said, 2-3 days or something. And I said, "Can we go for dinner tomorrow? I want to talk to you." And he said, I think he was a bit shocked. He said, "Okay, so why not?" So I took him out for dinner, and I said, "I'm going to make a documentary about something, but I don't know what it's about yet." And he said to me, "Do you know a guy called Christopher Robinson? Do you know Christopher Robinson?" And so I said, "I don't know Christopher Robinson. I've never heard of him." And he said, "Well, he was a guy that claims to have precognitions for many, many years. There was a book written about him, and I did some experiments with him called the Arizona experiments, which he was very unhappy because the SPR wouldn't publish them." So I said, and then a few weeks later, I was having a cup of tea with Guy Playfair, who passed away a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And he said to me, "Have you ever heard of Christopher Robinson?" I said, "No, but maybe I should go and find him." So he gave me his number, and I called him up, and I went to, he lives in Dunstable, and he was working as a cleaner, and his wife, she worked in Sainsbury's, probably still does, and they invited me for lunch. They live in another house in Dunstable, and he told me his connection with Gary Schwartz, and so I decided I was going to make a documentary about him, with Gary Schwartz. So I took him to America, and because I'd now left my old record business, and they didn't want me to leave, so I was on gardening leave, so I had a year off where I was getting paid. So I just went off and did all this kind of thing. Anyway, to cut a long story short, when I was making that was a really interesting experience to make that documentary, because Christopher comes across as a person that you can't believe anything he says, but then when you go and validate what he says, it stacks up. Everything.
Right.
He says weird things. So we were making. He was having premonitions about 9/11. We went to see Schwartz. He was having premonitions about the IRA. So the police gave him a handler. So we went to see that. So we went to see that guy, and he showed me all the facts, dreams he was having about the week before the London bombings. And then we went and saw some Daily Mail reporters who had asked him about Diana the day before she died, and he said all this kind of stuff. So he and I were spending a lot of time together at that time, and I said to him, I was asking about premonitions, and he said, "Well, funny enough," he said, "lots of people have them." He said, "But most people, they don't remember their dreams, they don't focus on them, and certainly they don't really look, and they don't really keep an eye on what's going on in their life. So they might have a vague idea that this is something true." But I thought to myself, well, I've been writing this journal now since I had this accident, and I've been writing down dreams, and I could see that some of them were. And one specific one comes to mind. So I had a meeting with a friend of mine, music business friend of mine. I'm going out to his record company in Wandsworth, and that morning I had a dream. I'd had a dream that to give you an example, it's a bit boring telling people dreams, but you asked me to tell you one, so I'll tell you one. So in this particular dream, the guy who I'm going to see the following morning, he's in it, and I'm at his house. But it's not his house, it's a different house. And in this house, there's water going all around the house, like a moat kind of thing. And there's a dog there, and there's other thing. And we're sitting in a sort of glass atrium type scenario. And this prescription drugs are a major feature of the dream. And his partner, his girlfriend at the time, is in the spare room. This is in the dream, and she's done something bad has happened to her. Right. Something bad has happened to her. So that was the dream. So I've written it all down. So anyway, on my way up to, so I'm driving a few hours later. I'm driving up to see this guy who's in the dream, funny enough, and Christopher Robinson calls me on the phone. So I said, well, okay, I had this dream this morning. I'm now going up to see this guy, and I told him the dream. I said, what do you think? And bear in mind, there was other details in there I haven't shared with you, like there was a white Labrador and he had a black Labrador, that kind of thing. And he said, well, he said, all the things you don't recognise about the house are interesting. He said, so the moat and the atrium and obviously and he said the fact that the girlfriend's in the spare room is relevant. That's relevant, and the fact that prescription drugs, you know, and something bad's happened to her, maybe she took an overdose or something like that. So this is where you get into where you want to make an assumption rather than just looking at what you see. So anyway, I arrive at the office of this pal of mine. He doesn't know that I've been in his tree. And while I'm he's talking to his doctor, as I go into the office, ordering prescription drugs. So I thought that was interesting. I've known him for years, never known him order prescription, never seen him on the phone before. And then, so I hadn't told him anything about the dream. And then we sit in his office, we're just going to go out for lunch. And he tells me that he's sold his house and he's moved to a new house and I must come for lunch the following week. So, because I knew he'd been selling it for a few months and he was in between, and so he'd rented this house in between. So he said he must come a week later. So a week later, my girlfriend and I, we turn up at his house, and it's a big sort of manor house type thing. And sure enough, there's a moat a water going all the way around the house. And then we go into the house, and he said, oh, his girlfriend's arranged for us lunch, and we're in a glass atrium, and that's where the lunch is. So I thought, at this time, and my girlfriend's looking at me, and I'm looking at her, and I'm saying, wow, this is interesting. And then I'm thinking, well, I better not mention anything about the girlfriend was in the spare room, and that something bad's happened to her. I better not mention that because it didn't seem appropriate. But anyway, so I told him about the dream and about the atrium, about the water and that sort of thing, and I left the other bit out. And anyway, we were sitting there chatting about it, and then she said, was that it? And in the end, I said, well, I will tell you something because I'm worried about it. I'm a bit worried about you. And I said, what? She said, well, in the dream, I said, you were in the spare room, or his partner. It wasn't you in the dream, it was his partner in the dream. And something bad happened to you. So I said, so, you know, be careful. Anyway, we finished lunch and that was that. Anyway, a week later, his wife called me up, very excited / upset, because she said the following week later, they'd had a big argument and she'd gone and slept in the spare room and somehow fallen out of a window. That was all right. He had to take her to hospital and all this sort of thing. She'd opened the window or something. She was having, I don't know what happened, but I don't know what happened. So that was an example. That is an example of one. But I've had a few like that. So, but interestingly, I was having them, but I was aware of them more when I was making this documentary, because then you're sort of engrossed. I mean, now I don't pay attention. I don't know if you do. I don't pay attention. I don't write them down all the time now. But that struck me and then I had another one, for instance, where I'll give you one more, where I woke, and it's the timing that's always interesting. On this one particular one, I woke up, and not by now, I'm now, Christopher was telling me how to do it. He said, when you wake up in the night, if you wake up at 4 a.m, he said, don't even open your eyes. Before you even open your eyes, grab the pad. He said, if you've had a dream about meeting Anthony, just write down Anthony, and then forget it. And in the morning, you'll remember the rest. But if you write down the keywords, you'll remember the rest. But if you don't, and so I was doing that. So you'd end up waking up in the morning and you'd see words you've written. And you kind of think, well, why was that? Anyway, this one particular morning, I woke up in the morning. So then I opened my dream diary, if you like, and because you've almost forgotten what you've written down, because you're in that sort of zone. And on this particular morning, I'd written down. I woke up in the night. I'd written down Henry Reid, and I'd written down sort of R-E-I-D, R-I-E-D, or R-E-I-D, and then I crossed out, and I'd written Henry Reid, R-E-E-D, and I'd written Henry Reid thinks he's a UFO. Right. So anyway, so I wake up in the morning. I'm looking at this, thinking, what does that mean? So anyway, I went on the internet and I googled Henry Reid, W-E-R-D, and sure enough, there's a website I'd never heard of before called Henry Reid. There's a guy there who does all this geometric stuff in America or something. Anyway, I don't know the guy anyway, but he's henryreid.com, just for fun. So I sent him an email. I sent him an email. Dear Henry, I said, last night I had a dream about Henry Reid. Now, what was interesting about this email was, I said it was to do with UFOs. I said it's to do with UFOs. I didn't say that he thought he was a UFO, right? Anyway, so he doesn't know who I am from Adam. He's just got this email from me, and I said to him, so I sent him an email saying, "Dear Henry, I had a dream last night, and something to do with UFOs, and your name was in the dream." He said, "What?" And he wrote back saying, "Well, it's funny you should say that, because he said, I had a dream last night where I was a UFO." That was fascinating. I mean, that was fascinating stuff. So those kind of things.
Wow.
Those kind of things, and they're kind of, and it can't be the coincidence to my mind, can they? Really, those kind of. Anyway, there's been. Those,
well, this is the thing here, isn't it? You know, there are various things that I'm intrigued on here. The first one is you probably have read An Experiment with Time by J.W. Dunn.
I haven't read that book. No. I've read a lot of books, but not that one.
Okay.
I know read it.
And you know of Dunn and his idea of that precognitions are actually dreams that we've had previously. So here you have a classic example of precognitive dreaming in the Dunn fashion. Now, I'm particularly intrigued with your story there of you contacting the guy. The dream stimulated you to contact Henry Reed. And it was then your contacting of Henry Reed that stimulated him to remember the fact that he'd had a dream about being a UFO. Now, this is something that has long intrigued me, and it's something that long intrigued Dunn, and effectively also intrigues an associate of mine, Dr. Arthur Funkhauser, who is the world's leading authority on déjà vu. And Art stayed with us recently. We filmed a documentary here 2 weeks ago from an American crew, and I invited Art over from Switzerland to talk about his experiences and things. But what is intriguing here is the way in which the circumstances create the circumstances by which the events take place, which means to me that it's somehow embedded in our perceptions of the future, are somehow embedded. And they're also sometimes very, very mundane things. Now, your two examples, the first one was far from mundane, but was very intriguing because you were actually seeing future events that you could not have possibly known about. And there is no way that that can be applied and explained by what the statisticians or the skeptics will say is the law of large numbers. The idea that if you have a dream, you know, there is a chance that something might come to pass that will vindicate the dream. But you had very precise descriptions there of the moat, the atrium, linked with the circumstances of the young woman.
Yeah.
Then you have the most bizarre statement that you wrote down, which makes absolutely no sense, but suddenly makes sense when you discover it. Now, to me, to say that these things are just statistically, there are statistics, is nonsense. And it's unscientific in so many different ways. Now, my question to you is, do you know which part of your brain was damaged when you had the accident?
I don't know. I didn't even have a scan.
Because it's interesting, because you say that the damage was to your jaw.
Well, what happened was I fell on my face, but I fell slightly to the left because I know that my teeth are quite big anyway, and this tooth had bitten this lip in half, and my jaw was broken on both sides. So I'd fallen on my face, but I don't. So I don't know.
So I was wondering, the impact would be here or behind the ear. If your jaw was broken, the impact would be around the ears or around the ears. That is the temporal lobes. Now, the temporal lobes are specifically the area that I argue, because people, when they experience temporal lobe epilepsy, have precognitive experiences. And on this show, we've interviewed people like Myron Dial, who is a guy that has profound temporal lobe experiences where he's precognitive all the time, goes into out-of-body experiences, lucid dreaming, the whole thing. Now, I wonder whether your accident has stimulated your temporal lobes in some way, and you've slightly probably damaged, because, as you know, your temporal lobes sit above your amygdala, which is the area that supposedly memories are processed. But imagine that we have memories of the future, and if your temporal lobes are damaged in some way, they process information out of linear time and in a different form of time. And I think this is what you're experiencing here, and I think you can draw certain conclusions from your experiences here. But your experiences are totally fascinating. So from all this, you decide, how did White Crow Books come about from all this then?
What happened was I become, as I said to you, because it's very difficult to explain how, when I say to you, I felt very different. I don't know. it's very difficult to explain that to Phil. Still feels the same way. So, my personality is still the same. I've still got a lot of the same friends, although I've got some different kind of friends and stuff like that. But you just feel completely different about everything. And I can't even explain now how that is. But if you take the idea, for instance, of, if you take the idea of, but I just, I'm walking around there. I'm walking around and I see everyone. I see everyone as I see everyone. I'm seeing people the same as you're seeing people. But I now look at everybody as just that we're all in a bit of a game. We're all just, and it's to use Shakespeare, we're all actors. And you walk in the supermarket and there's the guy behind the counter. And to me, he's no different to Donald Trump. He's just playing the part of the guy behind the counter, whereas Donald Trump's playing the part. So you look at everybody, and if anybody, the other thing I always think I was quite kind of non-judgmental, but we're all judgmental to a degree. But now I'm completely not judgmental, in the sense that I would still be judgmental of an act. But the idea of judging a person for anything they've done, to me, is just ridiculous. Because we don't know the whole story of that person, and because it's only the small part of while they're here. This is how I feel now. This is completely alien to how I used to think before. So then the idea of forgiveness comes in. That the idea of, if someone upsets you or something, you might still be upset with someone for a second, but then it goes. Because the idea of forgiveness is just a state of mind, because none of this is real. So therefore, what's to forgive, if you see what I mean? So and that's what and really the book I was talking, the dog book, that's all that kind of thing. So so this is an ongoing kind of thing. So I really what I did have to do, but at first, when it happened, for the first couple of years, because I didn't like how I was feeling, because it was confusing, because I was quite happy before, and now I wasn't feeling happy before. So, but then I had the Brian experience, and I went and sat with some mediums and had some good experiences. And really, I've been, ever since then, I've been validating those experiences. And then what happened was, some years later, I woke up one morning. I decided I made some documentaries. I made one documentary with Crystal, and then I met a director, and he wanted to make music programs. Everybody likes the music business, and I wasn't interested in that anymore. So I said, okay, well, we'll make some, but I want to make this one. So we did that, and we made a program about Pink Floyd, which I won't go into bore you with now. And
it wouldn't bore me; it'd fascinate me. But we need to.
I can tell you a story about. Tell you a funny story about that in a minute. But and then one morning I woke up and I was reading a lot of these old books, reading a lot of old spiritualist books, I suppose, life after death stuff. And I woke up one morning and White Crow books was in my head. And I know where the name came from. The name was in my head from the William James quote. In order to disprove all crows are black, enough to one white crow, that sort of quote. And so then I decided, it was all very well me going off gallivanting around the world and spending my savings, if you like, but I needed to do something. And then I was very interested in it. So I decided I was going to start republishing some of these old works, because now you have a situation where you've got, I didn't know anything about publishing books, by the way, but I did know about the record business, and it's very similar. So it wasn't just a stretch to say, well, I've been putting out thousands of vinyl and CDs and cassettes for years, and downloads, how hard can it be to do something? And so I started putting out old books that are out of copyright, and then I started going putting books out. But I was only interested in the subject. I wasn't really, if someone came to me, people say, oh, you've got this book out, I put some music biography out. I say, no, I'm not really interested in publishing. I'm interested in the subject. And so, and then authors started approaching me, and I've been doing that ever since, really, in a kind of small way. And that for me is a bit of a means to an end. It gives me an opportunity to talk to people like you, and a bit like you do your writing. I'm sure you're writing about this particular subject. If someone asked you to write a book about, I don't know, the price of baked beans, you probably wouldn't be interested. But so it gives us a means to become engrossed in it. So I'm still, and the interesting thing about the whole thing is, every time I find an answer to something that validates how I feel, there's another question. I find interesting, as I get lots of synchronicities, and I'm fascinated by synchronicities, because I still try and work out, well, how do they work? How do they? I mean, you must go through that. And every few days there's one. I mean, I'll give you an example of a silly one, which before I would have just thought was a coincidence, but there's so many of them. People say, well, people win the lottery, but they don't win the lottery every week, So to give an example of one, because it's in February, 2 months ago, my father died, and he'd had a stroke 3 years before. He was elderly, and and he was in a nursing home, and I got a phone call from my sister about 8:45 in the morning on a Sunday saying that he died. And I said, when did he die? And she said, oh, he died 15 minutes ago. She had a phone from the nursing home. And our mother, he had a stroke 3 years ago. My mother had a stroke same week, a year later. My sister's looking after her now. So I said, have you told Mum yet? And she said, no. And she said, well, I want you to come. Will you come down and we'll tell her together? Because she's in a bit of a sort of, she's okay, but she's in a brain damaged state. So I said, okay, I'll get ready and I'll drive down now. She's about 20 miles away from me. So I got up. I've got up. It's about 10 to 9 in the morning. I've gone into the bathroom. I'm cleaning my teeth, and the song, "The Missing Years," about the guy about his. And I thought, well, that makes sense. That song would come into my mind. So I'm cleaning my teeth, in my mind, singing that song, "The Missing Years," about a guy's talking about when his father died, etc., etc. Blah blah blah. So I did that, and then I get dressed. I get into the car. I turn the radio on. It's on Radio 4, Sunday morning. It's the Archers or something. I don't want to listen to the Archers. So I turned to Radio 2, and the DJ introduced The Missing Years, and it came on. So that happens a lot. But when that happens, then I start thinking, how does that happen? How does that work? I didn't make the song come on. The more you think about it, the more. So how does that work? So how does that work with J.B. Ryan's time? I don't know how. But it did happen. It did happen, and those things happen a lot all the time. Those kind of things. I don't know if you ever get those kind of things, but they happen all the time, more and more and more. And
the scientific explanation will be confirmation bias, or you've noticed things because you're more attuned to noticing them. But as your very pertinent point was made before, that the argument to say, well, one person will always win the lottery, so therefore they think they are special. Of course, that's not the case with these things, and they tend to be rooted coincidences in terms of synchronicities. I mean, I experience them a lot, and some of them are just bizarre beyond words. Sometimes there's the cosmic joker. I know that you're fascinated by Jung as I am, and the idea of sometimes you see the joke and you go, oh yes, very clever. I now see what you're doing. And of course, this suggests, doesn't it, that the reality that we're perceiving somehow is attuned to us, that there's an attunement going on between us and the external world. Now, if it is the case that our active observation collapses the wave function of this reality, which of course in quantum physics is something that's completely acceptable now, we in some way must influence the external world. And it is almost like the external world is trying to give us a clue, and it's giving us a little nudge in the solar plexus to say, wake up and pay attention. Now, again, you may be interested that later this summer, I'll be doing an event in High Wycombe, where we've got a whole day event, and there will be myself, Dr. Penny Satori, Graham Nichols, and 2 or 3 other people who will be talking about synchronicities. And my particular theme on that day will be Wolfgang Pauli and the way Wolfgang Pauli of the Pauli exclusion principle. He wrote a book with Jung on synchronicities. And of course, he was one of the leading guys of quantum physics in the 1930s. So here we have something that really we are misinterpreting, and if we start to realize that synchronicity is telling us something about the true nature of reality, particularly your fascinating point there about the idea of this is all a game, this is all some kind of simulation that we're within. Your wonderful line about Donald Trump and the guy that is in the paper.
That's how I feel. Whether it's right, that's how I feel. It feels,
Now, I would argue that what is taking place with you is your accident has opened up your doors of perception. Your doors of perception are more open now. It's widened. Effectively, for instance, your precognitions, we could argue that it wasn't James himself, but James used the term the specious present, and the idea that, we perceive in certain circumstances what is the present moment stretches out for some of us, and we can perceive the future in some way, which has been vindicated by experiments such as Dean Radin and Bierman and various other individuals.
Maybe the future isn't really the future. I mean, the idea of, we've got the idea of time. We don't know what time is, maybe.
No, it is, exactly. I don't know if you've read my book, The Labyrinth of Time, but in that I approach that in that way. So now we'll move quickly on, because we're coming towards the end of the discussion now. But I'm very interested because you sent me this wonderful book.
Oh, that.
Which is absolutely fascinating. I'm really looking forward to digging deeply into this. but I know a little bit about the background of the book and the storyline of the book. So if you can tell us a little bit about A Dog's View of Love, Life and Death, which of course isn't written by you, it's written by your nom de plume, which is somebody called J.R. Archer, probably because you like, I don't know, their peach schnapps or something, I don't know.
No, if you like, shall I tell you why I did it by J.R. Archer? It involves a story that you like, if you've got time. So my mother and father separated when I was 2 years old, and my father's name is Archer. And I didn't meet him until I was an adult. I met him 4 times, and 2 of those before he died. And he died in 2001. And so I grew up. My name is Beecher since I was 3 years old, and that's all I've ever known. Anyway, but since all this sort of thing happened, and I visited mediums, I've had very interesting experiences with that side of my family. So to give an example, I was having a Skype conversation with a medium in Belgium. I was trying to get her to do some experiments with me, do a few like people did years ago on Skype. So we did 4, and one of them nothing happened. One of them, some people came through. She gave me names of people from the music business who were trying to get in touch with people, but I had no idea who they are, and I didn't find out who they were. But 2 of them were very interesting, and one of them, she said to me, "I've got your father's father here." So, and we were like you are. I'm recording it, so it wasn't like a normal sitting where I'm being very quiet, and So, and I've said to her that if she gets anything, I'm going to point it out. If anything I'm interested in, I'm going to point it out to her, and because I want her to concentrate on it, because we're kind of doing an experiment, a mediumistic experiment, let's say. So she said, "I've got your father's father here," and I said, "Oh, that's interesting." I said, I never knew my father's father. I had never even, I grew up with my step grandparents, if you like. They were my grandparents growing up. So I said, I never met my father's father. I don't even know my grandparents' names. So that's what I said. Anyway, so she carried on talking, and we were just talking like you and I are. And then she said to me, "Oh, I've been given this name, Edward." Bear in mind, she's from Belgium. So I said, "Well, it's quite a common name here, but it doesn't mean anything to me." She hasn't said this, she hasn't said where it's come. She just said it's just coming to her within a few minutes. And then she said a few minutes later, "I've been given this other name, Mary or Maria." And she said, and I said, "Well, it doesn't really mean anything to me." So then I we had a conversation, and it ended. And I thought, well, that wasn't really anything. So then I went back and listened to the recording again, and then there I am at the beginning of the recording saying, she said, "I've got your father's father here," and I'm saying, "I don't even know their names." And then she's been giving me these 2 names. And so she hadn't said these are coming from there, and I hadn't put 2. And I now have 2 brothers from my father. He got remarried, who I'm very close to now, that I didn't know all those years ago. We've got to know each other in the last 15 years. And so one of them, I sent him a text saying, "What were the name of our grandparents?" And he came back, "Edward and Maria." And that's pretty impressive, isn't it? Because, I'll defy anybody to guess the name of my grandparents when I don't even know. He couldn't have known. No people don't even know that part of my family. In fact, now they might know because I've told you and a couple others. But there's no way she would have known that. And then a few times my stepmother and my grandfather, my father had come through. So I sort of wrote that book in their name because, as I said to someone then earlier on, I said they didn't help me at all when they were alive, but they've helped me enormously since they died.
Because because the book has a fascinating idea that we are being dogs guide us, because dogs are kind of guiding spirits. And you were telling me earlier on a little bit about
all-knowing, non-judge. The dogs would be, the dogs could be enlightened beings. They're beyond religion, and they're just hapless humans wandering around, messing up, making mistakes that we all do, and all this sort of thing. And the dogs are just influencing us, trying to move us towards unconditional love, which is their default state. But obviously we are, that's the kind of, and it expresses ideas. The dogs could have been hamsters or something else, but they're dogs. And the reason I wrote the book, really, again, I had never thought about writing it. It never had occurred to me for a second to write a story. But when I took these dogs from my parents, because they were ill, I was living in Brighton. I was walking the dogs one day, and as I was standing on by Brighton Pier, this idea came into my mind. This picture came into my mind. The first scene, funny enough, was a guy called Robbie jumping off a car park roof. And Robbie is a real person, unfortunately. Robbie was a dear friend of a dear friend, and he jumped off a roof in the car park in Newcastle 10 years ago. So that scene came into my mind, and then this idea of dogs knowing more than we think they know. So I went home and wrote that down. And then basically I went to the beach every day for the next 3 months, and another idea came to mind, and I wrote them down, and that's what that book is.
So the influence of Rosie and Rags. Yeah.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Now, we're coming towards the end, but you've really intrigued me about the Pink Floyd story. So maybe we can finish off with that. And
well, the synchronicity thing, quickly. Have we got time?
Yep, I can make time.
Okay, so the synchronicity, because it's a music. So we're making this program called Technicolor Dream, which you can find out. We saw it on television and everything. It was about the emergence of Pink Floyd in the 60s in London and what was going on there with the anti-nuclear movements and all that kind of thing. And what happened, we managed to get an interview with Nick Mason, the drummer. And my son, I said to him, and we had a cameraman, I said, well, you go and do it. I don't need to go and do it. You can go and do it. And Nick Mason's got, I think he had an office in Camden Town. Anyway, about a week before this happened, I got a email from a woman in Vancouver, out the blue, who was a medium. So who said she was a medium, or was interested in these kind of spiritualist experiences and all that kind of thing. And she heard I was making a documentary, but she was talking about the Christopher Robinson document, didn't know again. And she just wanted to communicate. So we sort of started communicating, right? And I won't give her name because it would be inappropriate. It might be inappropriate. I won't give her name. But anyway, so this was about a week before. So anyway, a week later, so I've had this email from this woman. Let's call her Betsy Smith. I've had this email from Betsy Smith, and she's talking about mediumistic things, and she's interested. I don't know how she got to me. I don't know why she emailed me, but she wanted to have a chat about it. So we start having an email dialogue, and I tell her about this documentary I'm making, various other things. And then a week later, I'm making this program completely separate about Pink Floyd, and my son's going to interview Nick Mason. He calls me after the interview, and he loves Pink Floyd, especially the Syd Barrett era. And he calls me up. He's very excited. He said the interview went great, but the interview went really well. Dad, blah, blah. Nick was great. He said we can use photos from the archive as long as they've used them before. And he said he's given me the name of the archivist. Anyway, I said, okay, great. I said, where's the archivist? He said, I don't know, but I've got her number. I said, what's her name? He said, her name is Betsy Smith. Now, this name is very unusual. It wasn't Betsy Smith, it was a very unusual name. So I said to him, I know someone. I've just been communicating with someone called Betsy Smith. I can't think why that is. So anyway, then I go back and I realised that the woman who's emailed me from Vancouver, her name is Betsy Smith. So I emailed her and said, you don't work for Pink Floyd, do you? She said, yes, I've been working for them for 25 years. So anyway, so that's not the end of it. So I said, so have you? So we then end up meeting up and all the rest of it. And then we're trying to work out this huge synchronicity. What were the chances? You heard just emailing me out of the blue about this. And in the meantime, we're making a program about Pink Floyd. It turns out it's all the same kind of thing. And I said, well, I don't think we're meeting because you're helping me it's to do with making a Pink Floyd program. I don't think it's about that. Maybe there's something I can do for you, or maybe there's something you can do for me. Maybe that's why. We're just speculating, you know. And so I've got to digress slightly if we got time. I've got to digress slightly. 6 years after I had my accident, I was taken into the Royal Surrey Hospital in Guildford with a broken jaw. 6 years later, my sister, the one I mentioned earlier, was out riding with my stepdaughter, and she was thrown from a horse, and the horse trod on her face, and her jaw was broken in 9 places. And she was taken to the same hospital in Guildford with the same injury. Neither of us have had any other injury in our life. So she was taken to the same hospital, the same injury, broken jaw. And when we looked at it afterwards, my accident happened 1 month before my 44th birthday, and her injury was 1 month before her 44th birthday. So wow. That's pretty weird in itself. Just keep that in your mind. So anyway, that's pretty weird. And she went through this whole thing. She had to have £35,000 of dental treatment, all this kind of stuff. She's now a vegetarian. She didn't have the same experience as me. But anyway, so Betsy, go back to Betsy Smith. So I said to Betsy Smith, well, there's obviously a reason that we're communicating, but I don't think it's to do with the Pink Floyd program. Anyway. So we just had this big synchronicity. Anyway, about a year later, she called me. She was traumatized because she was in London. She'd fallen over in the street, fallen on her face and broken her jaw. And I said to her, and she's traumatized, she's worried about her face, worried about she won't look pretty good anymore and all this sort of thing. And I said, listen, don't worry about it. Honestly, you're having the treatment. Don't worry about it. It'll all get fixed. I'm going to put you in touch with my sister because she had this accident as well as I did, but she's a girl and you can talk to her. And because psychologically, it was affecting her, this sort of thing. So she did all that. And she called me about a year later saying, I wouldn't have got through that. I was really traumatized by that accident, and I don't think I would have got through it if it hadn't been for that. And I said to her, maybe that's why we met. I don't know. I don't know, but there's just these huge coincidences.
Yeah.
There's weird. So I can't. Who knows why? But that's the story. That was the little one behind that Pink Floyd documentary story.
Wow, that was an incredible one to end the interview with. Absolutely, my shivers up and down my spine. And I know from Dia's reaction, which we just heard, obviously that really blew her mind as well. Right, so if anybody's interested in contacting you or interested in your work, can you give us any kind of contact details?
Well, if they Google White Crow Books, and they can just go to info@whitecrowbooks.com.
Wonderful. Wonderful discussion, John. Really, really enjoyed it. And I think this is just the beginning of possibly a very interesting friendship here, because there's so many areas of overlap that we need to pursue, which we will do. And I'm sure there's a reason why we are in contact. As Dia and I always say, there's a reason for all this. We are putting together.
Absolutely. And Dia is the linchpin.
Yes. We are linking some very interesting people. And I think that's profoundly important. Okay, so thanks everybody again for listening in. I hope you enjoyed this program half as much as I did, and obviously Dia did as well. And clearly John has done so. And as with all our guests, we're very, very keen to have them back in the future as well. And I'm sure, John, you will definitely be involved in that as well. So again, thank you very much for listening in, and we'll see you again in a month's time. Okay, thank you.
Tony, thanks very much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.